7 train cars left the tracks near UT's campus. 4 of the 7 carried chemicals, but crews reported no injuries, spills, or leaks. 10 News anchor Brandon Bates looks at what's rolling through the tracks that crisscross Knoxville. Brandon?
Well, John, the train that derailed today was carrying acetic acid and butyric acid. Nothing was spilled, but they can be harmful to humans. And if there were to be a leak, hazmat crews with the Knoxville Fire Department would have had to act fast.
Ignorance is bliss, I guess. People aren't aware of all the chemicals that come through Knoxville, whether it be on rail or whether it be on our interstate system.
In Tennessee, Norfolk Southern alone operates 829 miles of train tracks. 5% of all outbound trains and 12% of the inbound trains contain chemicals. Some of those are toxic to humans. And while it is rare, sometimes those trains go off the tracks. And when that happens,
it might scare some people.
The Knoxville Fire Department's hazmat team has to act fast.
They are a different breed of firefighters. They know the chemicals, they know what they do, they know how they react, they know what to do when one of those chemicals spill.
It's their job to identify the chemicals, evacuate people if necessary, and then clean up the mess.
When they respond, everything's going through their head.
Some of the most recent and serious derailments in East Tennessee came in the 90s and the early 2000s. In 93, a Norfolk Southern train derailed and a highly flammable chemical caught fire, injuring 4 people. In 2002, another train derailed, releasing fuming sulfuric acid, forcing 2,600 people to evacuate. Then in 2006, 65 people had to evacuate in Sweetwater from a derailment.
We live about half a block up the road. Yeah, we're losing the train, buddy. Train never bothers us.
After today's incident, some people in Knoxville still aren't concerned.
I think you got a worse chance of getting by a shark than being covered in some sort of chemical spill.
And Fire Captain DJ Corcoran says these train cars are built to withstand a lot of force, especially if they contain toxic chemicals. But anytime one of them jumps the tracks, you really never know what to expect. Robin and John?
Brandon Bates on the story. Thank you.
Authorities